In today's project, we're going to take a look at how we can create this scroll animated landing page that you see on the screen. We're going to cover some cool techniques. We're going to have parallax, text animation, pinning sections, and yeah, the basics that you need to create almost any scrolling animation, I would say. So yeah, let's not waste any time and let's get into it. So the first thing that I want to go over is the Figma file for this project. I'm going to explain a lot in this video about the reasoning behind some of the techniques, because I think that is really important for you to know. You could just watch this video and code along or pull out the techniques, but the way to actually get better is to get the right mindset to create your own animations. So you don't want to just copy paste. You want to try to really think about how you can implement these techniques in your own projects and try to get the techniques and the reasoning behind what we're doing today. So we have this simple landing page. So we have a few images that's laid out in like a floating grid kind of thing in the hero. And this is all set up on a 12 column grid, except this one. And yeah, so the idea here is to make these kind of float as you scroll in a way. So some parallax or something would be cool. And then in the next section, which is just it looks like a static text section. My initial idea was, and I'm going to show maybe two different versions of this. My initial idea was to have, as you scroll, you reveal more of the text. So initially the text would be like opacity 30 or 40 or something. And then you have, let me see if I can get this to work. You have the exact same text. And then, let me see. Yeah, so what I was thinking is this kind of revealing effect where you scroll and more of the lines or sentences are coming in as you scroll. Either that, or we could just have a fade up of some sort. We're going to take a look at that. And then the image section could be a pinned section like we have in the final version. And the bottom is just for some dummy content, so not really important. So it's three main sections that we're dealing with today. And yeah, it's important to kind of take a look at design first and think about how you want it to move and how you can emphasize the content. Because that's what animation should be about. It should be to emphasize the content that is already there and not be just like a cool effect that you just slap on something. So yeah, let's get into the code and check out the project. I already set the markup and stuff up, so I'm just going to explain how that works. Let me see. This is the one. Yeah. So the way it's laid out is we have the hero. So I'm just going to go over the sections. So we have the hero first with the title and the images. And what I want to do here is animate all the images and also the words or the letters for the brand name. So what I did, you could, of course, do this with a library or something. But just for simplicity's sake, I wrote it all in spans so we can target each individual letter. And then all the images are just placed in a hero images, and they are positioned absolute. Let me see. Yeah, so you see image number 1 has a certain width and height and top and left, and the same for each one of these. So yeah, they're just styled accordingly to the Figma file. That's the hero. And then we have the text section, which is also very simple. It's just a container. But what I did, because I wanted to have the revealing of each line, I needed each line to be on its own like block or its own element. So I have a text effect div around each line. So this, it's its own block. This is its own, and so on. And then we have the full width image. So this is just an image inside here. This is position absolute. So the section is 100 view per height and 100% width. The thing is, I added this clip path. So if I turn this off, you can see it's full screen. When I turn it back on, it clips in. And I got this from Clippy. So here I just went to the, what is it called? Trapsoid. I can't even pronounce that. Trapsoid. And I just tweaked the values here. So I just found like, you see the numbers down here. I just tweaked it until I had, I think 5% on each side and then 10% for the top. So you see, 5% for the sides, and 5%, and then 10%. So just cropping that in. Yeah, and then the footer or the call to action section is not animated, so not really important. So yeah, that's the project structure. The styling is pretty simple. So I'm not going to go over all the styling. It's not really that important. We're mostly going to tackle the animation today. So let's get into it. What's the first thing we need to do? If we tackle the hero first, or actually the first thing we're going to do is add our smooth scrolling, because that is really simple. So I already set up in the HTML a couple of scripts. We have GSAP, we have ScrollTrigger, and we have something called Lenis, which is the smooth scrolling. So you can find all these. You can find this on GreenSock, and you can find this on lenis.studiofright.com, which leads you to their GitHub repo. So you can see here, I just installed it using the script and just pasted that in here in the head section. So Lenis is a smooth scroll library that's kind of unique in the way that other smooth scrolling libraries usually hijacks the scroll for you. So what would happen is, for example, because you hijack the scroll, the normal scrolling function in the browser isn't running. So stuff like position sticky won't work, or intersection observer and stuff like that. So I haven't dived into how it works, but it's a really cool library, and you should check it out and yeah, have a look at their website and the repo. But let's get into it. So to get the smooth scrolling to work, I also added this index.js where we're going to write our code, and I placed that at the bottom before the body section with the script. So this is currently empty, and I'm going to show you how I like to structure my code in bigger projects, even though this is a small project and it's just for one tutorial. I still want to show you how to structure your code properly and just have good practices. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a class called app. And inside we're going to have a constructor, which is the first function that runs in the app. And let's just call new app straight away so we don't have to do that later. So what I like about having a class is that if you have multiple JavaScript files, you can have one main file and you can kind of control everything from one class. So if you have a lot of effects, you can say you had multiple files, you could import file 1 with an effect, and then you could set up everything here to say like run file 1. And you could kind of structure your code to know exactly what is running when. And that's also what we're going to do here. So the first function we're going to create is called this and then underscore. The underscore means you don't want this function to be called outside of this app class. So initialize. And then you create this here. So this just references the app, which has a method called initialize, which we just created. And this is going to run our code that we're making later. So we're going to have that, and we're also going to have a function called render. And render is like the loop that is running for Lenis to work. So for Lenis to work, we need to create Lenis first and foremost. So in the initialize here, I'm going to say this.create Lenis. And then we have that here as a method. And Lenis is really easy to set up. We're going to store this in a variable. So we're going to say this.Lenis equals new Lenis, and then pass in an object. And the only option we're going to pass in is called lerp, and set that to 0.1. You can find all the different options here on the repo of the Lenis library. So they have a bunch of stuff like easing, duration, orientation. You can do like horizontal scroll. You can do infinite scrolling. So yeah, a lot of cool stuff here. So definitely check that out. And then to actually run this, we need to put this in a loop. So let's do that. So in the render function, we're going to reference this.Lenis that we set up. So we're going to say this.Lenis. And then they have a function or a method called RAF, which stands for request animation frame, which needs a time to run. And right below, we're going to request animation frame ourselves. And this is going to be a loop. So we're going to say this.render. So this will run in a loop 60 times per second. And it'll go back to this. It'll come in here again and go back to this. So it's an endless loop. And because we have a class here, we just need to say .bind and then pass in this. And also we need to pass in time here. So this is accessible here. So the time comes from our request animation frame, which is running this function. and this function gets passed time from this, which we then pass into Lenis. Kind of confusing, but that's how it works. I might go over like JavaScript stuff in a different video. So the last thing we need to do now is to, let's see if that works. Yep. So now we have smooth scrolling with only like, not a lot of code, like 5 lines that we actually need, which is awesome. So now we have smooth scrolling, which just feels more natural to this sort of project. And yeah, then we can start animating the hero. So what I did and what I usually do is I have a data hidden attribute that we can add on all the things we want to hide initially. So if we add this, it's going to add opacity 0. So what do we want to hide? We want to hide all the images and the text. So let's go into the hero and we can hide the words here. So that just hides the words. And then we want to hide all the photos. Like that. So now anything that is below the fold is usually fine. Anything above we should hide in CSS because that can cause a flash of unstyled content once our animation starts running. Okay, so we hide everything and then we can slowly introduce it back. And then we're going to continue creating like these simple readable methods. So I'm going to create a new one called create intro. And you see the more we start adding, you see the better this is for readability and like keeping your code clean. And also like place the methods in the order that it's created. So create Lenis comes first and then create intro. Then this would naturally come first and I put this below. Okay, so before we start animating the intro, one thing we need to do as well is we're going to use GSAP for this animation. And what I want to do is I want to not only animate opacity, but also transform. So I want all them to like start somewhere down here and then like move up as they fade up. And transform is a little bit tricky. Like across browsers, there's many different behaviors in browsers using transform. So you should definitely tell GSAP where the images are. Meaning you should not just do it in CSS, but you should also do it in GSAP. So what I usually do is I have a method called this.setInitialStates. So let's create that here. And what we want to do here is we want to tell GSAP everything GSAP needs to know about every element before we start animating it. So this is going to make more sense in a little bit. So what we do is we say gsap.set, which has no duration. It just like sets the style immediately. So we want to set all the hero title span. We want to set that to a Y position of 32 pixels. And we want to set it to opacity 0. This is just telling GSAP, set the state, and then later we're going to animate back to Y of 0 and opacity 1. So this is going to make more sense in a little bit. And I'm actually going to set this up for all the elements that we want to set initial states for now. And those things are the text lines that I said in the beginning, and also the text here, because this is going to scroll in. So if we go back to the code, we can just continue here. Like, you can target more than one element in GSAP by just doing a comma, just like CSS target. So we're gonna say text effect, and then target the actual paragraph inside, which is the text effect block that I showed you, and then the actual text inside. So that one, and also the full width image text, which is also this text here inside. So the text here, now it's hidden. Okay, so now we set all the initial states for those. And now let's do a different one for the images in the hero. So just continue gsap.set hero images, and then the actual image tag. And we want those to be opacity 0. And we wanted to have a Y position. So initially we wanted to start from some Y position down. So all of them are going to get a Y position. And you could set this up to be like a certain number, or like something you want to figure out by yourself. But I'm going to use a GSAP utility function. So you can say gsap.utils and then .random. And what we can pass in here is a number between something. So I wanted to go down by max 100 and a minimum of 50 pixels. So this is going to run for each image. It's going to set a Y position between 50 and 100. So it could be 58, could be 70, could be 99, could be any number in between. But it's going to be random every time. So every time we refresh, this is going to run, and it's going to get a random number. So you could use this in a lot of cool ways in your animations. Okay, and then we just need one last thing to set the initial state. And that's with the full width image, and then the actual image. And that is referencing this one. Because what we want to do here is we want to scale the image up initially, and then we want to like scale it down as we scroll in the pinning section. I'm going to explain that later. But for now, we just set the scale to 1.3. Okay, so now we have all our initial states. This is very good to do because now GSAP is tracking, for example, the scale, which is using transform for this element. So now we know GSAP has the correct data for it to run smoothly. So let's start on the intro. And what we're going to do here in the intro is we're going to set up a timeline, which is just a GSAP timeline. And we're going to say TL.to. And then we need to set the hero title div to opacity 1. which is the one that we have the data hidden on. So this is the words. So we need that to be opacity 1, of course, to be visible. And then we can chain another 2, and we can do hero title span, which is the actual letters inside. So each of the letters. And we're going to go back to y of 0, because remember we set this up here to be y of 32 and opacity 0. So now we're going back up to y0. We're going to go back to opacity 1. And then we can set an ease of expo.out and a duration of 2 seconds. And then we also want to stagger each letter. So we're going to stagger by 0.01 and have a look at that. Yeah, so you see now it has like a nice stagger effect. If I set this to 0.1, you see they come in one by one. But just having this slight stagger instead of that creates a more natural looking animation. Okay, so we have the text. Now let's do the rest. And we can chain another one here. So we're just chaining to the timeline. And we can do hero image and then target the actual images. And the same thing here, we want to go back to opacity 1. We're going to go to Y0 because we also set this up here to be opacity 0 and a random Y value. So Y of 0 and then ease. Here we can have a power 3.out, a duration of 2, and a stagger of 0.04. Cool, so you see now the text comes in and then the images. What we want to do is we want to not have like this stop after this is done. We want it to happen, the images to happen sooner. So what we can do to make this run a little bit quicker is the last, like in between the last 2 brackets here, we can do a comma, and we can either say, if we say 0.5, which is the one we want, which is like just a static number, this means run at 0.5 seconds after the timeline has started. So if you see now, they happen kind of at the same time. But we could also do a string here and say minus equals 1, which would overlap the previous one by 1 second. So this is a duration of 2 seconds. So this one would now start after this has run for 1 second. So, but we're going to keep the 0.5 because that's the value that we want. Okay, cool. Now we have the intro animation. So let's start setting up the parallax for this hero. And this is also very simple. It's actually surprisingly easy to do this nowadays. So we're going to create a new method called this.createHero. So now you really see the power of like, or at least I really like this to see, okay, this runs first, this runs after, or just for like organization sake, it's really nice. Okay, but create hero, we're gonna place this here. So we want to have like a parallax effect, and we're gonna use GSAP.ScrollTrigger for that. So I'm gonna show you trick to add stuff to a timeline where you wanna have multiple elements on a timeline. So we're gonna create a timeline like we did. GSAP.timeline. And what we want to do is we want to target each of the hero images. So each of these. So what we actually want to do is store these in a variable in the constructor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say this dot hero images equals, and then I'm going to spread a query selector. And we want to get all the hero images and the actual image. So now we have these in a variable, which we can use down here. And we're going to loop over each of these. So we're going to say this dot hero images, and for each image, we are going to add something to the timeline. So we're going to say TL.to, and then the actual image is the target. What do we want to do? We want to set the Y% to, again, I'm going to use the gsap.utils.random. You can set a number here. You could tweak this however you want. I'm just using a random number because don't need to tweak this project that much. And we want them to move upwards. So we want a minus value. So we want them to move between -100 and -50. And we also want a ease of none. Because when we scroll, we don't want it to like have a weird easing. So now we added all of this to the timeline. So you can see if I run it, they happen instantly. So how do we trigger this on scroll instead? The way we do that is now we added all of these to the timeline. So this loops over each image and then adds a .to for each image to the timeline. So if we go into the timeline itself, we can pass in scroll trigger on the entire timeline. So we can first pass in a trigger, which is when do we want this scrolling animation to trigger? What's the element we want to trigger it by? And we can choose the hero, which is like the full section here. So that will like start right up here at the beginning of the page. And we can provide a start value. So we can say top, which references the first one here references the actual hero. So if I write it in plain English, it's like when the top of the hero reaches the top of the viewports. So this references the hero, this references the actual viewport. So if I said center, it would mean when the top of the hero reaches the center of the viewport, which is the middle of the screen. We can visualize this better by saying markers true. So you see now, when I have it to center, there's a start right in the center. But if I say top, all of them are at the top. So now it starts anyway because everything is starting at the top. And the second thing we want to do is, because we're going to scroll through this, we want an end value. So again, we can say bottom top, which means when the bottom of the hero reaches the top of the viewport. So now you can see that the bottom of the hero here has an end property, or an end marker, I mean. So kind of hard to see, but the end is also up here. So now it starts here and it ends down here. So the start and the end is in the same place. But the way to visualize this now, which is the last thing we need, is to say scrub of true. By doing that, now nothing is moving by default, but as soon as we start scrolling, things are scrubbing. So you see I can scrub up and down and things are moving. So if I take this off again, yeah, so now everything is happening on scroll. The last thing we want to do actually in the timeline is like we did here, where we pass in like when do we want it to start. For each of these, we want it to start at 0. So all of the dot twos is going to start exactly at the same time. Because if we don't include this, when we're looping over this, this will essentially just start doing this, which means this runs first, this runs after, and so on. But we want all of them to happen at the same time. So if we do 0 and now go back, you see all of them happen at the same time when you scroll, which is what we want. Okay, so that was essentially the hero. I think this is a really cool effect, especially when you have this floating grid. So yeah, that's the effect there. Now let's focus on the text, which is currently hidden. So let's go into the code again. And the first thing we need to do here as well, because we set up each line to be its own effect, we need to store this as well, or these, in a variable. So let's say this dot text equals, and do the same thing, document dot query selector all, and then text effect, and then p. Or actually, we just want the text effect, because we have inside each of these, we have a text overlay. So the way this is set up is, let me see if I go back to, oh yeah, we set that up here. If I just comment this out for a second. The way this is set up is each of the text effect have a text inside and then a text overlay. So what we're going to do is for each of the overlays, we're going to scale the X transform. But if I do this, you see the effect. So if I make this red, it's easier to see. So this is essentially what is happening. You see each line here has its own block of overlay. So if I just do the top one, 20%. So this is what we're going to do in the animation. The reason it's working is because we have the overlay the same color as the background. So in this case, it's white. If we just set this back again and hide it, we can create this in JavaScript and it's going to be easier to see. So then we're going to create a new method called this.create text animation. And inside of that, we're going to create a timeline like we did. And then we're going to loop over all the text. So this.text dot for each text. And then we also need the index here. So we're going to pass that in here. And then we need to, because this is referencing this, we need to select each of these inside. So for each of the text, we're going to say const overlay equals text.query selector, and then text overlay. And then the content, which is the actual text, is text.query selector, and then just P. So let's start adding to the timeline. So 2, and what we're going to do is the overlay. We're going to set the scale X, which is the horizontal direction, to 0. And then we need to say that the content should go to Y0 and opacity of 1, ease of expo.out, duration of 2, and we want each of the lines to have a stagger. But since this is for each individual text, saying a stagger won't do anything because it's only referencing this. So saying stagger 0.1 wouldn't stagger because it's only this one. So because we're inside a loop, we're going to add a delay for each instead. And that's where we're going to use this index. So you can create a function where you just say index times 0.1 instead. And then we want these to happen at the same time. So just pass in the 0 as the last argument. So now you see we have a fading up of each line, which is now just happening straight away as I refresh. Make it scrollable. We want to do the same thing. Add a scroll trigger here to the actual timeline. The trigger is going to be .text block, which is the parent of all of these, so the whole section. So text block, we want it to start when the top of that element reaches the center of the viewport, and we want it to end when the bottom reaches the top. And you can also tweak these values by providing a string here saying plus equals 10%, for example. Or you could just do like 100, which would be in pixels. So let me see. And then we also need scrub true. So something is off here. This should be scroll trigger. Yeah, so now it's easier to see exactly what's happening. So if we start again, so you see as soon as the scroller hits the start, the animation happens. Now nothing is happening after because we haven't set it to scrub. So if you wanted to scrub, you can just say scrub true. And that will run the animation as we scroll. So that's one of the effects that you can have for the text. And then I'm going to show you the other one, which is the overlay thing. So actually, just to do that, we can remove this for now, and we can remove this part from the set. So we don't want it to be opacity 0 and Y of 32. And just by doing that, we have this other effect, which is the scrolling one, which is also a very cool effect. So if we go down again, yeah, like you could literally create that effect just by having this much code, which is really cool. And yeah, I find this effect very interesting, and it's like very eye-catching to see. And then the last thing we need to do is animating the pinned section. So let's go back again, create a new method, call it create pinned section. These could obviously have better names and you could reuse them, but for this small project, we just go with this. So create pinned section. And as usual, create a timeline. And then we start adding to the timeline. So .2. And then what we want to do is we want to have some text overlaying the image, but the image is a little bit too bright for white text on top. So what we have in the code is an overlay, which is opacity 0. So if I set that to 0.5, we just darken the whole image. So we're going to do that as we scroll as well. So that's full width image overlay. We're going to set that to opacity 0.4. And then we're going to, on the full width image container, we're going to set the clip path that I showed in the beginning to like scale out. So what I did was I went to Clippy. I just went to this one again and reset all the corners. Copied this and just added like a percentage behind each of the zeros because sometimes it doesn't read well if you don't have that. So that's what I added here. And if we check that out, let's see. We also need to set up the scroll trigger here in the timeline. And the trigger is the full width section. Full width image, I mean. And we want to start when the top of the section reaches top of the viewport. We want it to end. I'm going to do in pixel values here. So I'm going to do, after it hits this, we want to do plus equals 1500 pixels. So once it reaches this threshold, we want it to continue the animation for 1500 more pixels. Then I'm going to say scrub true. And yeah, let's check that out. So you see now that the overlay works, and also the clip path. It happens later because, like I said, we want stuff to happen at the same time. And now you see they happen at the same time. But we want this to pin. So we want to like reach this point, and then we want the section to pin until the animation is finished, which is also incredibly easy with scroll trigger. You just say pin true. And that will literally pin the section until the animation is done and then continue. So a really cool trick that you can use. And yeah, I just find it really satisfying. So the last thing we need is the image itself inside, full width image, and then image tag. We set this in the initial state to have a scale of 1.3. So now it's a little bit bigger than it's usually, or what its original state is. So if we go back down again, we can now say scale this down to 1. And this creates a really cool effect with the scaling of the image down while the clip path is animating. So let me see. We need to set it to 0 here as well. So you see now it has like a zooming kind of effect, which is really, really cool. This is almost like Apple vibes. Yeah, I just find that effect really nice. And then the last thing we want to do is just animating the text. So full width image, text. We want that to go to Y0 and opacity 1, because we also set that in here, the full width text. So now everything, we also want that to happen at the same time. Yeah, like that. So now we have a pin section with a very cool animation. And this is way cooler than just having this as like a static scroll by section. Yeah, really cool. And that's the effects. As you can see, it's really simple to create some really cool effects with ScrollTrigger and with some initial ideas that you can have. And this is only like, 120 lines of code maybe. And it's really easy to set this up. And I find the structure here to be very readable. So yeah, this was the video. I really hope you enjoyed it and got some good tips from it. If you have any questions, just let me know. And if you have any suggestions for videos, you can also let me know. And I would really appreciate it if you gave this a like and a subscribe if you enjoy content like this. Okay, enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.